Okay, so that's all the topics for the
Yeah, I think what is important is what you see how many different topics we discussed in just these 4 hours of the workshop or 5 hours.
yeah,
This was really incredible, and how
yeah,
deep
and
we
we
went into some of these topics. Amazing. That was
yeah,
really fun.
it's something that does leave you. I mean, we're going to have more workshops. There's one that's coming up also in New York with Chris, which is going to be just immerse yourself for like almost a week of classes like this, just working on problems like this, which is going to be incredible. But it's in
Amazing.
person, right?
Yeah,
Online. I've done these before; they're very exhausting. So having something within 4 hours, I think, was really really good.
yeah,
And so we're going to try to concentrate, of course, more information in these, and then of course have two variations. We can send the people that are new to the concept and get the basics, but then have a second option of another one where we can dive into some of the things we're talking to now,
yeah.
which were this workshop was advanced, I guess.
Absolutely, no question. But
Yeah.
it was
So
fun.
we have,
It was fun.
yeah, it was. I can't wait for the next one. It was really
Yeah.
fun and really engaging. So, no, definitely will be posting that soon. And so, topics from the Discord. What did the community talk about this week?
Let's see. I think we have three topics that are interesting. So one was if you implement processes and command handlers, where do you make the external call? Where do you make the call to an external system? That was a bigger discussion. And there are people who say, you need to do it in the command handler. There are people who say, you need to do it in the processor. Uh, yeah, I don't know. What do you think? Where do you,
Well,
or is there a third option? Maybe I don't know.
I'm not sure if there's options. I think you just have to think of, how do you keep the integrity of the part of the system that you control, because what the greater issue here is that you're relinquishing control to an external system to bring in information from something
Yeah,
else which you don't have control over. And I think when you're talking about event sourced systems and not losing information, you have to have high accountability for the information you manage and you generate. So my idea that the first thing you have to make sure is that all the logic in your command handler is deterministic. And for me, that means the call does
that's the
not go
important point.
in. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's, you're working with pure functions. Whenever you're running a unit test on your command handler, um, it's running very quickly with just parameters. Like pure functions are like math functions. Like, you're just giving values as input parameters and you're expecting an output, and they're pure functions because given the same input, you'll get the same output as long as the function didn't change. And this is very fast to execute. It's predictable. So the number one thing I'd say, no, definitely the API call for an external system does not happen in the command handler. It happens outside. It's kind of I forget what the pattern is. The name for this is where you bubble up any dependencies to be outside the current function. You
Yeah.
make that call by whatever instruments the call like is actually making the initial call to your function. You make that process or that function or whatever that is just above. You make that do the call. Return. I mean, it could be a lookup of an interest rate. It could be process a payment and get a confirmation number. It could
Yeah.
be anything. But then you're basically feeding the output of that external call as an input there, and that gives you the wrapper around the logic you control to be a pure function. That's the number one step.
Yeah.
The second part is really not as important, because I think if you get that step right, I'm really not too finicky about how you do anything outside of this command handler. I want my command handlers to be pure.
Yeah.
And that's it. So I don't know. I don't have too heavy an opinion on there, and I think I was discussing it with someone as well. I think I answered that. Where where do you have this call? And I think in my live streams we're going to be touching that pretty soon. I did have a processor. Someone was asking for how to do the processor, so I think it was you actually. Like, show us how you do the processors in this
Yeah.
file-based event source system. So I did that this week, and so there's a whole bunch of 2.5 hour streams that kind of go through all of this, and so yeah, and I would make the call outside. I think there's another fine sort of like another problem there is like, do you have an API layer and then do you have a processor above that that calls the API layer for some long running stuff? And then it's really, there's another question here: is the call being done on the other side of the actual application layer API call, which is just kind of above the command
Yeah.
handler, or do you do it even outside of that when there's a processor? I try not to have it in the processor. I want the processors to actually be dumb. I want them to really just to schedule. They're more like schedulers of when things get run. I don't want them to have these other very domain specific things in
Yeah.
there. I want the processors to really have almost like a function that you pass in to say this is how you're going to check whether you run or not. And the processor is really, really dumb. So
I
again,
mean, that is kind of an implementation detail. I think you can
it
do it
is.
one way or the other. But for me, the important point is actually, and you said it, keep the command handler pure. Because if you don't do this, you need to start using mocks and stuff like that. And this
Oh
makes
yeah.
testing really awkward and ugly.
Yeah, you're just inviting a whole bunch of tooling. The minute, I mean, the litmus test there, and how does this feel? And if it's feeling pretty bad because I'm now, I feel like I have to include a bunch of libraries just to get my work done. Yeah, that's a always guess another way. if
Yeah,
you're if it's not going well enough and you're requiring more libraries, etc., to keep productive, that's a smell of your design becoming too complicated than it needs to be.
actually, it should always feel easy, right? Whatever
That's
you do,
right. Yeah,
it should feel
that's
easy.
why
If
it's
it doesn't feel easy,
fundamentally.
something's wrong.
Yeah, if it's not feeling easy, if you don't have this cadence of like every slice is just another thing that I do that I know how to
Yeah,
do, if you don't have that feeling, you haven't kind of defined where you're pushing out these isolated things such as external interactions with external systems to be contained, to be well. Because once you do this, let's say it's a payment processor, right? You might have that payment processor being used for 10 different things in your system. You want that to be, something that you solved once. It's not, this interaction with Stripe or whatever is not how you write your systems, but it is how Stripe requires
yeah,
their APIs to be used. You want to capture that once and then repeat it everywhere else. It's part of your infrastructure, and you
absolutely.
don't want that to be a brand new problem every time you have to do a payment.
Yeah. Typically, if you work with this long enough, you shouldn't solve any new problems. Most of the stuff is just patterns you repeat all over the place.
Yeah, I mean that's at my company, this is the bread and butter. The reason that we can continue to work on bigger and bigger projects and do them faster and with higher quality is because it's a predictable thing. We're mastering the ways that work best to solve information systems, right? And we're
Yeah,
talking insurance companies and point of sale systems, et cetera. We're not writing brand new search algorithms. We're just digitizing the real world, and that's the majority of the problems out there. And we want to do it in a very predictable way.
yeah, beautiful. That's the new world.
Yeah. So is that good enough for that? Did we
Definitely.
go down another rabbit hole too much?
Yeah,
I don't
I think that's
know.
that's fine. So should we move on to your topic? I think you also have another topic you want to talk about.
Oh yeah, just about the live stream. So trying to do a lot more live streams so people can see live coding. I think there's a lot of people, hey, Adam and Martin discuss esoteric topics with like no real examples in front. I think we get anyone that's been in the domain-driven design space or any of these other architectural spaces. You get a lot of this like drawing boxes on whiteboards, having heated discussions in your chats in your company, all sorts of things like that. And I really always want to say I need to always show how does this actually impact the development workflow, right? So it's been a couple of weeks now of doing some examples for um, doing some of these things that we're talking about. So how does that
Yeah,
look in code, this processor, right? How do we do a to-do list? What is this magical to-do list? No one else is doing things like this. We have like sagas and all these process managers and all this stuff. What is this magical to-do list? Well, here's an example of one, right?
it's
So
not so magical in the
yeah,
end.
it's not so magical. It's actually very easy. And some of it, if you're watching this on YouTube, then there's some of it's behind me in terms of how how we work with things now. And one of the interesting things is just how we started to do the given when thens in our event models, and there actually there's quite a bit that came up here. And if you are looking at it, we have this this idea that we can have a sparse collection of the history of like events that happened, but we can also divide them up into small sub histories. And then as these events happen, what does our to do list look like as we do that? And it's to the left of me if you're watching me online. And so, yeah, that allows us to actually have some pretty opinionated ways of doing unit tests, which I think now I'm coming to the conclusion that event sourcing is so good that it deserves a better unit testing framework. And so the implementation is kind of interesting. This is a rare opportunity to see some code in here, but this,
Yeah.
the conventions, conventions of having, slice tests and having collections of slices that you're testing, and then inside those slice tests, you have a collection of timelines, because you can generally you just want one, but sometimes you have like a couple of timelines where there's some, that's it's a symptom. If you have two of them, you probably are missing some workflow from in the main part, but we'll allow more flexibility. And so now you have this collection of timelines, and the magic within the timeline itself now is that you can have something like the timeline can be called happy path, and you just walk down the what should happen, and you show how that one green box changes along a typical timeline. But you can add more ones where things don't go so well, or you want to show some of the problems we talked about earlier, where we have the transactional boundary, where you want to have only once. How do you deal with eventual consistency, where before you had this table row, and giving you that ID and
Yeah.
blocking anything else with the same thing. So we have all of this explained a lot easier, and the code just jumps out so much easier. And even AI picks this up. I mean, rewriting some of this, I will clip some of the last stream, just how quickly the AI was able to rewrite the opinion of this. And one of the biggest things, if you just look right above my head, there is a, this function that's the test. The two parameters that we have is the event history and the state that we're going to check against. And so now these assertions that we have are quite awesome, because we have the suite under test, and we have this very, very predictable. Remember, we talked about predictability. Have this incredible predictable pattern of how we test things. We always have the suite under test is, for example, this room state view. We only pass the event history that we want, and then we take the result and we assert on what we have in this array that we have of all the different expectations that we basically say what the state is. We give the event history. So it translates directly from what the business people are looking at here. It's insane how one-to-one it is. But the other thing that we added here is really about these labels, which is, I think, was missing from a lot of the purists of event sourced systems. The purists in event sourcing say you shouldn't need any more stuff that you have in your use cases. You should really just express everything you need with an example timeline and all that. Well, that's a tough bridge to jump or to cross for some people. And so I think adding these labels really allows you to now express what you would express in a traditional user story. And it translates beautifully in here, because your test harness can look for these things where there is no test defined. It can just skip it over. And so if I look at my implementation down here of my test harness, which is kind of a test harness that's built specifically for event sourced systems, where you want to test if there's actually a test defined here. If it's not, just keep going. And of course, we're using an accumulator here and a reducer, so we can capture all of the tests results here and spit them out at the end. But that doesn't matter. The key point is that we're always just running through this array of tests that we define, which has a really nice history of the events of how do we get to them. But also,
so readable. So readable.
yeah, exactly. And the important part here is this line here, where we actually collect the the events so far to create that history that we put in as a
Yeah.
parameter, right? So this is kind of interesting because in our accumulator in this reducer, we have this event stream property which just keeps adding these things. So as sorry, keeps adding these events as we go through our storyline. Visually for business people, they can see how we continue to move down here. But really, the magic happens here is that we just keep pushing this to this array that keeps building up this history that we then check the functionality. So lots of cool stuff happening in terms of kind of freeing ourselves from the shackles of the traditional development out there,
Yeah.
and really building things that are now specifically custom made for this way of working. And because we've been working this way by default for so long now, it's nice to be able to just carve something that's specifically built for this. So a big lesson for me here is like, yeah, you just don't need NUnit or JUnit or whatever unit framework is. I'm doing JavaScript, and I was able to create the test harness very quickly. The test harness does there's some similarities, like if you're doing BDD, there's sometimes and some other test frameworks where you could have an attribute above the test where you could specify like an array or a matrix of like
Yeah.
different values, and then your unit testing framework would iterate through those to run that one method over and over with different parameters to test a whole bunch of things. This is sort of the same, but I think there's a lot more power in this one because you're really inspecting your progression through a timeline in a much better way.
Yeah.
So I think this is a very, very good thing, and also the fact that it's made for this approach. It's going to make development a lot easier. So I don't know what's your thoughts on this? I mean, are you using Axon and you're using?
I mean, I'm basically bound to JUnit, so I will play around with this and see how I can integrate. So my big plan is definitely to integrate this whole format into the Miro plugin. I want to support this because I want to work with this, and then I will figure out how will this look like in Java, for example, or in Kotlin. So yeah, I'm not yet
Yeah,
sure,
I think the
but
question is like how this is digging into another rabbit hole. How tied do we? How tightly tied are we to our unit testing
yeah,
tooling? Because unit testing is simple. How did
it
we tie
is.
ourselves? Oh, if I'm in .NET, I need to use NUnit. I'm in JUnit in Java. Like,
Yeah,
can we free ourselves from this? I think some of it is the tooling has been baked into like VS Code and all the other editors that you can just like run the tests. It's like,
yeah.
but what if that test framework is not the best for what you're doing? What do you do? Do you not do the tests the way you want just so that you can have NUnit because you have these nice things that pop up in your IDE? What do you
Good
think?
question. Good question. I don't know. I don't know.
Because I
I mean,
certainly, I'm
you
just
certainly
happy to
do.
run it on on the command line. I mean, I like the fact that I can express the tests in a better way, and I don't mind going down to the command line and just, hitting up arrow and enter to run them again.
Yeah, you certainly would want. So I would want the support in the IDE most probably. So maybe an adapter is would be the best tool for it. I don't know. So I will figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm curious to see what you do because obviously I'm not running any of these Mocha or any of these other unit test frameworks, and
Yeah.
it might be just I mean, maybe I'll just look at one of them if those are extensions to VS Code that are open source, and butcher one of them to actually go and use whatever I have, give it some other way to, filter my
Yeah.
source
Yeah.
code for them and see how
That's
they
good.
go. But anyway, lots of fun. So we covered a lot this episode.
Yeah. Again, we went over time, didn't we?
We got to be better at this. But anyway, okay, so let's just end it here. And,
Yeah.
that's a couple of final announcements. I forgot we have the newsletter that you've been sending out, which is great. I want to have a couple of entries for that. Got my my chapter for event modeling being worked on. And then, of course, the workshops that are going to be announced. Anything else that we're missing?
I think that's the important
Extra
stuff.
chapters in the book. Don't forget to get the LeanPub book to get the extra chapters, which now have the security chapter, which
Security
is
is
very
in.
important.
and the other one is coming.
Yes. Yes. Do we remember what that one is?
It's handling sensitive data.
Yes, a GDPR and right
GDPR
to be
and sensitive
forgotten.
data. So it's really a super interesting topic. And um, the innovative thing is, I will also provide implementations how to handle it. You will find this nowhere. All the articles talk about you need to take care of sensitive data, but nobody tells you how to. I will provide
Yeah. Yeah.
implementations for it.
I think it's really good that we're, both of us are providing code all the time for anything.
Yeah.
But I think the concepts are, because of event modeling, we're also talking about these concepts to business people where we continue to, keep that bridge alive between the two sides. So I think it's
Yeah.
really good.
And one of the conclusions in the chapter is event modeling tremendously helps with GDPR because you
Yeah.
know at all times where is data used and how.
Yeah.
Everything is transparent. It helps
How are you?
tremendously.
Yeah. I mean, looking back now, how much harder would it be without an event model to make these guarantees?
It's almost impossible. You don't know where this data is used. It's somewhere coming from your database. And if a customer requests delete my data, many systems simply can't. They don't know where this data is. It's everywhere.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I'm very happy that you wrote this chapter because it answers a very important question for, I'm a big advocate of privacy, open source, owning your own data, and having this chapter in there is like it's something that I'm so happy to hear, and so I cannot
Yeah.
recommend the book more than ever before. So please, you will need to be good with your users' data. This book now has a chapter that tells you exactly how to do it. So thank you for that, Martin. That's amazing
This is
work as
really
always.
the feedback I get for all these missing chapters. The missing chapters are actually answering the really burning questions, it seems.
Yeah, yeah. As you get past the trivial mechanics of the whole thing, yeah, it's almost like there should be a second book, the
Yeah, maybe.
advanced event sourcing or complete event sourcing. There's understanding event sourcing, and then there will be the complete event sourcing.
Oh,
I don't
yeah,
know,
that's a nice idea.
something like
Maybe.
that. But
Yeah,
anyway, it's
something. Yeah,
amazing to see. So again, join us on the Discord for these types of topics. We'll definitely discuss your topics here if they come up, and you can also just request certain things from us on the Discord
sure.
channel. Again, eventmodeling.org to get all the links there. There's a resources page, has the Discord link, but the book is linked to on the front page and all the other things that you need. So, again, thanks for tuning in. We went a little long. We'll see you next week again. And until then, Martin,
All
it's
right.
been
See
fun.
you next week. That's it for
See you
today.
next week. Bye.
Bye bye.